I've got news for you.
Welcome to CitizenView,
where citizens come to talk.
We're the two teachers. Out there in Washington, D.C., they're talking about the Fiscal Cliff. Here at CitizenView, Fiscal Cliff Notes.
Yes, the Fiscal Cliff Notes about this supposed economic crisis that's going to occur come January 1st if the Republicans and Democrats can't make some serious compromises.
Let's not forget, this was a self-created problem. The problem is they couldn't come to a budget agreement on deficits and debt. And so Republicans and Democrats put into writing this fiscal cliff. If we don't agree by December 31st, 2012, the Bush tax cuts go away and huge cuts go into play. Andy, this is the fiscal cliff.
Like a high school senior applying for colleges, Congress also has to give itself deadlines, imminent deadlines, that if they don't accomplish those deadlines, bad things are going to happen because Congress, just like you, likes to procrastinate. We're just seeing them cram to the end after the election trying to resolve this fiscal problem.
So here are the terms that we really need to make sure we understand today to understand the fiscal cliff. One, we need to talk about the budget. We need to talk about discretionary spending versus entitlement spending, mandatory spending. We need to talk about deficits and debt. We need to talk about revenue versus cuts.
Well, when you talk about revenue versus cuts, revenue you typically get through taxes. And certainly President Obama made no mistake in his rhetoric when he said that if you elect me, I'm going to try to raise taxes on Americans who make more than $250,000 a year to increase revenues.
Well, the problem then is, Andy, because the economy is poor and weak in its recovery, we still have so many Americans unemployed, those revenues haven't come into the federal coffers to pay the federal government's budget. Its commitments. And so here we've got this problem. Democrats say, raise the revenue, raise taxes on the wealthy. That will help address this problem. Republicans say, wait a minute, if we raise the rates, when the economy roars back, all we're doing is allowing Democrats to spend more money. We need to cut the budget.
And during the election, you heard Democrats talk nothing except revenue increases, and you heard Republicans talk nothing except cuts, spending cuts, especially spending cuts to discretionary spending. Discretionary spending are essentially the budget choices that our government can make on a year-to-year basis. Those are discretions.
But here lies the problem, Andy. 60% of the budget is mandatory. We call these entitlements. And of course, the entitlement programs are Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These programs kick in year after year after year and are protected by laws to do so. Republicans and Democrats know that if they're going to somehow solve the fiscal cliff permanently, we need to address some reforms in those entitlements. And Andy, this is the third rail of politics. Nobody wants to touch it.
No, nobody wants to touch entitlements because you're then touching the money of retirees or soon-to-be retirees who feel like that's their money in Social Security or that's the money they put into the Medicare system. In addition, of course, we know that retirees do one thing really, really well, and that is vote. And so if you take their money, there's always that risk that those retirees are going to come back and stick it to you in the next election.
Well, this is why, Andy, we're having such a hard time finding some sort of bipartisan solution is because the Congress is so partisan. And one reason this is in fact because elites vote in primaries and they select candidates that have made, in some cases, extreme commitments. The Republican candidates have made the commitment because that's where the right-wing elites sit. I'm not going to raise taxes. The Democrats, on the other hand, have made commitments on their left side. Their elites say, listen, we can't touch entitlements. And here is the problem.
But Dan, do you have any doubt that the resolution to the fiscal cliff problem is a mixture of both sides?
Yes.
Clearly, we have to increase revenues to some degree, and clearly we have to cut spending, not just in discretionary spending, or we also have to touch entitlement spending and cuts. The problem is our Congress has the habit of what's called kicking the can down the road. They know these are difficult decisions either way they go, so they tend to kick it down the road, hoping to address it at some future time. I'm not sure if that time's going to happen.
Then put the president in this mix, And he's really not part of the legislative branch. Although as chief legislator, a role we talk about in our classes that presidents possess, what's the president's role? Congress wants the president to take the heat here. What we're seeing from this president is, listen, I can campaign better out on the streets than I can in the halls of Congress. And he's traveling the country trying to stir up public opinion for his side, which is in fact raising revenue.
But he's also, as chief legislator, using that veto threat, telling Republicans and Democrats in the Congress that if whatever bill comes out of this discussion, if it includes certain aspects, he will promise to veto.
Say, we're CitizenView, and we're trying to get a handle on this big book, the budget book, and we're calling it the Fiscal Cliff. Today we've tried to provide you some Cliff Notes. One thing is certain, because I've read through the Cliff Notes, there is no spoiler alert. We don't know how this book will end, but the time is ticking. December 31st is fast approaching. We're the two teachers, and this has been CitizenView.
No fancy words, no fancy suits.
Plain talk about issues you need to know.
Just in time.
I've